United Conservative Party members will have an opportunity to oust Alberta Premier Danielle Smith at the party's upcoming annual meeting. The party's upcoming annual general meeting on November 1st and 2nd will include a scheduled vote on Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's leadership performance, as well as governance and policy resolutions. I'm Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. I'm happy to be back on the show with you all this week, but I'll be even happier to see you in person very shortly, and I hope you feel the same way. Sorry if you think I look like death, but I am very sick right now, so I'm going to do my best to get through this show. But for those who haven't heard, I will be speaking at True North Nation in Calgary on October 26th, alongside Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, author Andrew Lawton, and my colleague and former host of the Alberta Roundup, Rachel Parker, along with other True North colleagues. I'm hoping that as fans of the show who eagerly await its release each week, you are also equally excited for this upcoming event. During the conference, I'm going to be going through a top 10 list of the worst and craziest ideas from left-wing leaders these past few years. I asked you guys for some ideas last week, but I didn't get much luck, and I'm hoping that now that we're closer, you can help me out more. I have a list, but it's certainly not all-encompassing, and I'm sure that there are definitely some ideas that I'm still missing, so hopefully this week you'll be able to comment below some terrible left-wing ideas in Alberta over the last few years that I may have missed. You can buy tickets to the conference at truenorthevents.ca, and I can't wait to see you all there. But now, let's get back into the UCP's upcoming AGM, which will feature Danielle Smith's leadership review. This will be the first review Smith has faced since she became leader in 2022. For members to be eligible to vote in the leadership review, they must have been party members since at least October 11th, 2024, register for the AGM, and attend in person. Former Premier Jason Kenney resigned after receiving only 51.4% approval in the last review, despite surpassing the 50% approval threshold required to avoid a leadership election. Following the leadership review results, Kenney said, quote, "The result is not what I hoped for, or frankly what I expected." He added that while 51% of the vote passes the constitutional threshold of a majority, it clearly is not adequate support to continue on as leader. Many of the other candidates who were runner-ups in the leadership review are well-known Alberta ministers like Travis Taves, Brian Jean, Rebecca Schultz, and Todd Loewen. But the AGM will feature more than just a leadership review. A total of 35 policy resolutions have been put forward by UCP members this year. A few proposed policies involve eliminating DEI within Alberta Public Service and Crown corporations and ensuring that hiring practices are based on merit alone. Another policy calls to protect female-only spaces and categories from transgender intrusion. Smith has already promised upcoming amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights, some of which will strengthen parental rights. However, one of the policies takes it a step further and calls for the provincial government to implement a Bill of Parental Rights to ensure that parents' rights precede government legislation. Some of her other proposed amendments address points called for in some resolutions. Another resolution calls for Alberta to, quote, "recognize the importance of CO2 to life and Alberta's prosperity by implementing the following measures. 1. Abandoning net zero targets. 2. Removing the designation of CO2 as a pollutant. And 3. Recognize that CO2 is a foundational nutrient for all life on Earth." One resolution calls on the provincial government to support any efforts to, quote, "axe the tax," including supporting the federal Conservatives movement. Alberta should follow Quebec's lead when it comes to provincial autonomy, according to another proposed resolution, which calls for Alberta to negotiate an accord with the federal government to grant the province more control over immigration. It reads, quote, "As Quebec has asserted its right to define and protect its cultural heritage and has a role in determining the total number of immigrants allowed into the province, Alberta is equally entitled to define and protect our own unique heritage, and we only need to assert that right to improve our quality of life." Other members want the province to acknowledge that there are only two biological sexes, making them the exclusive options on any government documents. One resolution calls on Alberta to continue distancing itself from the Liberals in as many ways as possible. It reads, quote, "Any policy that is implemented outside of Alberta that impedes good management and government on behalf of Albertans should be challenged at a constitutional level. Another resolution calls on the government of Alberta to live up to one of its key campaign promises, implement an 8% personal income tax bracket for middle-income Albertans and restore the provincial tax rate of 10% as the highest personal income tax bracket, reads the resolution. The tax break would apparently save over $1,500 per family, according to the resolution. Party policy resolutions are, of course, non-binding, meaning the UCP government would not be required to act on the policy if it passes, nor would they be required to pass something that did not garner majority support. Me and Rachel, Parker, and some of the rest of the True North team will be at the AGM, so if any of you guys are planning to go, I look forward to seeing you there as well as our upcoming True North conference on the 26th. Sticking with Alberta politics for our next story, the Alberta government is launching a nationwide advertising campaign to warn Canadians about the consequences of a federal cap on the oil and gas sector. Smith said that $7 million would be spent on the ad campaign, which includes TV, online, video, print, and social media. The ads won't only reach Alberta, but will also be aired in British Columbia, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia until the end of November. Alberta's strategy cites 3 previous reports in its press release highlighting the economic damage the proposed cap would inflict on the Canadian economy. I've previously covered all 3 of those reports at True North. The Conference Board of Canada's report estimated that the cap would reduce Canada's GDP by up to $1 trillion between 2030 and 2040 and lead to the loss of 151,000 jobs by 2030. An S&P study showed that if implemented, the cap would cut production by 2 million barrels of oil daily, resulting in a projected 51,000 lost jobs and $247 billion in lost GDP by 2035. Similarly, a Deloitte Canada report indicated that the emissions cap would cause Alberta's GDP to fall by 4.5% by 2040, while the rest of the countries would see a 0.4% decline. The 3 reports I just mentioned prompted Alberta to send a 24-page response to the federal government's draft regulatory framework to cap oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions. We already know that Canada is suffering from a production standpoint. Smith said that while the Liberals say they're cutting emissions, their true intention is to cut production and, as a consequence, decimate jobs and revenues countrywide. She added that Alberta's oil and gas industry provides tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in federal revenues to fund critical programs, services, and infrastructure. Smith said, quote, "All of this will be jeopardized if this ideological, irresponsible, and frankly terrible policy moves forward." Alberta's Environment Minister, Rebecca Schultz, said that the province is already leading the country in terms of emissions reductions. Emissions intensity per barrel has fallen 23%, which Schultz said can be doubled within the next few years. Additionally, she said that the methane emissions reduction target of 45% was hit 3 years ahead of schedule. She said, quote, "Just like Stephen Guilbeault knows that capping our production does not lower global emissions, it simply increases how much coal and other higher polluting energy is consumed from less clean jurisdictions around the world." Ironically, she said that the Liberals have missed every emissions target they've set in the last 9 years. Smith and Schultz confirmed that this new ad campaign is a follow-up to the initial Tell the Feds campaign, which warned Canadians about the Liberals' clean electricity regulations. Following the campaign, the Canada Electricity Advisory Council released a final report concluding that the Liberals' 2035 net zero grid goal was, quote, "unrealistic and unattainable." Smith warned that the Liberals are dangerous right now because the last few months of a government's life is when they're most volatile if they don't see a path to re-election. She added that COP29 is coming up in Baku, where she expects devastating unilateral announcements, like this very announcement that came from COP28. After the latter, Smith called Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault a, quote, "national embarrassment." Smith said, quote, "So that's the reason why we would do it now. I think there's a real danger that we're going to see some ridiculous policies announced in Baku in the coming weeks." Alberta's Energy Minister Brian Jean said that with the province's feats in reducing emissions, there was no reason to impose a cap that negatively affects the entire country. If the federal government proceeds, Jean said Alberta would take them to court. He said, quote, "They've had 2 defeats, and this is certainly going to be a third." Moving on to our next story, which sticks with the theme of Alberta versus the federal government. The Alberta government has warned that the newly enacted Liberal pharmacare scheme will result in needless costs and may infringe on the province's jurisdiction. Alberta Minister of Health Adriana Lagrange issued a statement on the passing of the pharmacare law, Bill C-64, on Friday. She said, quote, "Unfortunately, the federal government has yet to share its vision for the future of national pharmacare beyond coverage for contraceptives and diabetes medications, and how pharmacare will be financially supported in the long term while respecting Alberta's current offerings." Alberta's public drug programs cover more than 5,000 drugs, which Lagrange said is one of the most comprehensive programs in the country. She added that the province intends to maintain its current benefit offerings. The Liberals can assist them in doing so, but should not waste their time duplicating programs or creating unnecessary and costly administrative burdens. It's the same old story of the federal government unilaterally passing legislation without consulting the provinces. Schultz said, quote, "Without meaningful consultation and true collaboration, Alberta will continue to call on the federal government to provide predictable, sustainable, and unconditional health funding that aligns with provincial and territorial priorities and respects our exclusive jurisdiction over the planning, organization, and management of our healthcare systems." As mentioned, the first phase of Canada's pharmacare legislation covers diabetes and contraception medications. Alberta announced its intent to opt out of the National Pharmacare Program in February 2024, saying that the province was not consulted. Quebec has also previously signaled its intent to opt out of the federal pharmacare program, arguing that healthcare is within its provincial jurisdiction. Quebec has the longest list of drugs covered by a public insurance plan, yet private plans still cover 59.6% of more medications than the public option. The Liberals' 2024 budget proposed dedicating $1.5 billion over 5 years to develop the Pharmacare Act. However, between 2024 and 2027, the Parliamentary Budget Officer calculated that the total drug expenditure under pharmacare would cost between $33.2 billion and $38.9 billion annually, totaling $143.9 billion in the 4 years. The total incremental cost to the public sector would be between $11.2 billion and $13.4 billion annually, totaling $49.1 billion for the first 4 years. Look, that's a lot of debt that Canada simply can't afford. We'll remember that Trudeau officially doubled Canada's debt on August 30th, meaning he spent more himself than every other prime minister before him combined, bringing the debt from $616 billion when he took office to $1.232 trillion on August 30th. The Liberals said in a press release on Thursday that pharmacare will help 3.7 million people in Canada living with diabetes have universal access to various medications that improve their way of life. However, a previous study conducted by the Montreal Economic Institute showed that 21.5 million Canadians will have their coverage jeopardized by pharmacare. The study also showed that Canadians with private insurance obtain drugs within 226 days compared to the 732 days it takes for those same drugs to be covered by public insurance. The study also showed that while public plans across the country covered 54,954 unique drugs between 2018 and 2021, private plans covered 84,529. A previous poll showed that the majority of Canadians don't think pharmacare should be a priority, but that the government should focus on wait times and other pressing concerns within the healthcare system. Canada's healthcare system has already experienced record wait times, and it was recently uncovered that the system will need $2 trillion to deal with the country's aging population. Now moving on to a different story, which covers something that we've covered quite extensively at True North, food banks. So as Calgarians prepared for Thanksgiving this year, the number of Calgary households relying on food banks more than doubled since 2 years ago. This doubling was confirmed by Melissa Frum, President and CEO of Calgary Food Bank. She said that now more than 750 households are relying on using the food bank every single day. The most concerning part about this doubling is that it's working class people who are now turning towards food banks. And Frum said that this is always a last resort. So using food banks follows using coupons, pinching pennies, going without meals, and people even turning off their electricity before they turn to their last resort, which of course is food banks. A previous study highlighted that food bank usage had been reaching unprecedented levels across Canada. Demand surged 30% nationwide last year, with some regions experiencing even sharper increases. However, it's even worse in some locations. In British Columbia, for example, food bank visits rose by 57% since 2019, climbing over 100% in rural areas with populations under 10,000. Stéphane Sirois, executive director of Food Bank Dépôt Alimentaire in New Brunswick, previously told me that the system was, quote, close to a breaking point. He too said that working class people were visiting food banks, often for the first time, but not the last. Sirois said, quote, we're not seeing any signs of reversing the trend in the near future. In the next couple of years, numerous Canadians will have to renew their mortgage at a much higher interest rate. This will put even more families over the edge and make them vulnerable to food insecurity. Dan Huang Taylor, executive director of Food Banks BC, told me that more people were turning toward food banks in BC than seen in the 40-year history of operation. He said, quote, we're seeing this alarming trend of people who are working full-time, maybe 2 jobs, and they're still not able to make ends meet. The sharp rise in food bank visits can be partially attributed to higher food prices and rising costs of everything else. A Dalhousie University research study showed that 84.1% of its 3,000 survey respondents noted that their food expenses had increased in the last year, adding that they had to adjust their shopping habits to adapt to the rising costs. While official reports estimate food inflation between 2.4 and 3.4%, the study said that 54.5% of Canadians believe food inflation to be higher than government estimates. Things became so bad in Canada that a church from the United States stepped in and previously donated $2 million to a Toronto food bank. And the $2 million was a saving grace considering the number of monthly visits skyrocketed from 65,000 to over 350,000 since 2020. Calgary's nonprofits are ramping up efforts to meet the growing need. Meals on Wheels has surpassed 1 million meals delivered this year and is preparing to distribute another 400,000 by the end of 2024. The CEO of Meals on Wheels, Esther Elder, said it's the 3rd time in 3 years that the number of meals has exceeded 1 million. The organization plans to boost production by 180,000 meals annually with new equipment. The surge in food bank dependency is not unique to Alberta. Nearly 20% of Canadians now know someone who relies on a food bank. National food insecurity rates reached 22.9% according to Food Banks Canada's 2024 Poverty Report Card, which gave the country a D- overall. The report cited rapid population growth, high interest rates, and housing shortages as contributing factors to the crisis. True North previously reported that international students in Canada were filming themselves visiting food banks to get free food to save money. Canada's rent growth recently hit a 3-year low due to international student enrollments plummeting. Maybe food banks will follow. I don't know if I'll have time to put this on the show, but just a quick hockey update on the Alberta teams. The Oilers won Thursday night, which was a great game, probably their best they played so far. So I think they're 2-3 now, and of course Calgary is somehow undefeated. It was predicted that they'd be like a bottom 5 team in the league, but now they're like, well, based on the record, they're obviously the best team in the league because they're undefeated, so they're among the best, tied for the best. So I don't know what's going on in the NHL. The Oilers can't seem to start the season off with any sense of urgency, heart, or it doesn't even look like they want to be there. So thank God they're being paid millions of dollars to not show up to their jobs. Unlike me doing the Alberta Roundup when I'm extremely sick, as you can see, and I look terrible, but it's okay. We're getting through it slowly but surely. Now hopping into the comment roundup. Again, please comment ideas this week for crazy things that left-wing leaders have done in Alberta over the last few years. I'm supposed to already have my list in, my whole script and my presentation, PowerPoint, everything in, which obviously I don't have. I have a list, but that's about it. This sickness has set me back quite a bit, so hopefully I can finish that list and script and everything today, but I certainly can change it afterwards if there are some good ideas you guys provide that I've missed, and I certainly think I have missed something. But hopping into the comment roundup from last week, the first comment I'll go with was from Dovely 2024-YQ4YY. They said Randy should be suspended from his job immediately and without pay until this scandal has been resolved and the truth made public. If this had happened to anyone who works in the real world, he would have been suspended as soon as it was revealed. And if he was found innocent, then he could have reestablished back into his job role and paid for his suspended time lost. If found guilty, then he should be punished accordingly and lose his pension as well. The government has got to start setting examples for anyone who's been convicted for such behavior and corruption. Yeah, Dovely, yeah, I really agreed with this comment. I mean, I can't think of anyone in the real world, even coming back to professional hockey, professional athletes, if they were in some sort of controversy, we've seen them get punished before it was even proven, by the way. They've just, like, they're suspended without pay from their team until their allegations are not proven. So I don't know why the government has this special protection where it seems like they can do anything, break the law even, and get away with it scot-free. I guess it comes down to rules for thee, but not for me. The next comment will be two comments that I chose because they really made me think. Obviously, we're talking about that class action last week, which is still ongoing. So the first comment from Kathy8395 said, I hope there is a successful class action suit, and yes, I am Albertan and understand I will have to pay. But so will all the people that supported the lockdowns. I also want to see a clear message sent to our government that this was unacceptable. And then the next comment was from 69123. They said, the point I think would be to set a legal precedent. Yes, it will cost us money, but this will also protect future generations from government overreach. We should not practice boomer ideology which passed on issues and debt to the future generations. We are all hurting because of that. The principle is always more important than the money. I really like that quote at the end there from you. You said the principle is more important than the money, and both these comments got me thinking, obviously, because I'm an Albertan taxpayer, and I was questioning how I felt about the class action last week, given that I would be part of the people paying it out, which are the Albertan taxpayers. But you're right, that in sending this message that this is not acceptable, I think it is more important, and especially how that will last in history or in the future, I should say. Yeah, so it's interesting. I read through your guys' comments each week, and they help develop my own thoughts. And then the last comment from Gary Leon Hart 4925, who said, there was no heated exchange. Jennifer was calm, cool, and collected. She showed total control. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think Jennifer Johnson definitely showed absolute control. I don't know that I would have been able to stay that reserved in the meeting. I would have certainly called the transgender person, what was her name, Victoria, out on her hypocrisy. I would say, look, you're really, to even be in this meeting with you, I have to agree to your set of authoritarian rules. Yeah, that's not how the world works, and I'm not doing that. And if you can't respect me, why the hell would I respect you? Okay, now getting into the outro. We somehow got through this episode despite my sickness. I have to submit this in like 30 minutes, so I don't know how I'm going to manage that, but whatever. Because I do have to do some editing. Anyways, I'd like to thank everybody for staying tuned throughout the entirety of this Alberta Roundup. As I said before, it's one of my greatest pleasures and honors to be able to host the show for you all. And once again, a reminder that I will be speaking at True North Nation in Calgary on October 26th alongside Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, author Andrew Lawton, and my colleague and former host of the Alberta Roundup, Rachel Parker, among other True North colleagues. So during the show, I'll be going through a top 10 list of the worst and craziest ideas from Alberta left-wing leaders these past few years. Again, please comment any of your ideas and buy tickets to the show to see if your idea made the list. You can buy tickets at truenorthevents.ca. Like I said, I have a pretty decent-sized list, but I know there are some things that I'm missing, and I'm hoping that some of your comments can be about these crazy leftist ideas or quotes, although I understand that's hard when we talk about so many compelling stories on this show. As for the conference, I'll be speaking around 9:35 a.m., and I can't wait to see you guys all there. Thank you so much, God bless, and have a great week.